Good to see you again. So feel free to grab, and that's time chumash. Feel free to grab some coffee, whatever you have on the table.
Just bagel.
Some bagel, that's nice. We're gonna start with an opening question.
Oh, we always do.
As many of you know, so this is Tazria Metzora, and it's a difficult couple of parshiot because it talks about what is translated conventionally as leprosy. It talks about purity and impurity. It's interesting because we're coming right off of Shemini, where we talked about purity and impurity when it comes to not humans, but okay, buildings, animals. I was going to say with kashrut. Although we're going to get to buildings in Tazria and Metzora, because exactly, yeah, because they get infected with the disease as well. But so we just came off of Shemini where we got kashrut, which is about purity and impurity as it relates to animals, and now we're getting purity and impurity as pertains to human beings.
If I didn't misinterpret what I heard in some podcast or other, they were talking about purity and impurity, not as purity and impurity as we talk about it, but closeness and furtherness from the spiritual.
Good. So that's an important distinction, because purity and impurity in their translations have a certain connotation, a negative connotation, right? There's a judgment attached to purity and impurity, but tahor and tameh they're really ritual categorizations. It doesn't have anything to do with bad or good or gross, right? A lot of this impurity comes from bodily fluids, from menstrual cycle, from emissions of semen, from any sort of bodily discharge emits tumah.
They also sound harsher.
Yeah, okay, so maybe in Hebrew, there's a harsher sound. Sure, but I think definitionally, at least in the Hebrew, it captures the spiritual, the sort of spiritual nature of it and a ritual nature of it, and not this like judgmental, it's anything that happens naturally, right? Shouldn't be there, especially in Judaism, which doesn't denigrate the body, but elevates it to sanctity, wouldn't be degrading of normal bodily functions, right?
In chumash.
Of the word what? Har? I don't think so. I think it's a rabbinic category. I don't think that there's actually parv in Torah, but you can prove me wrong. Yeah. Yes, Terry.
Could one say that the Torah and Tameh, the situation relates to the bodily aspects bringing you fully into a physical aspect and drawing you away from the spirituality of the aspect of life, and that in purifying again, you're trying to reclaim that balance or take on more.
Okay, interesting. So Ron was sort of framing it as closeness and distance to a sort of spiritual experience. And Terry, I feel like you're furthering that and saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, that maybe there are some physical experiences that might spiritually distance us. And so through the purification process, we're coming closer to the spiritual and away from the physical. Is that what you're saying, maybe?
Yeah, or regaining the balance, because we obviously have to live in this world.
Yeah.
But we have to maintain a balance that gets disrupted, for sure, with illness, but then these other aspects that force us to focus more on the natural world and the issue of insects and, like there's different things that just take you to a different place.
Okay, interesting. Well, I like the idea of balance, right? That ultimately Judaism is not about we have to live all of our life in the spiritual. That's not only unrealistic, it degrades the physical to say that we have to eschew the right, and this is very Kabbalistic, that there's dveikut, which is the idea of clinging to God, sort of attaching to God, and there's the gashmiut, which is the material, the physical. But Jewishly speaking, at least in mainstream Judaism, it's not about casting off the physical and embracing the spiritual. It's about elevating and revealing the spiritual and holy within the physical and the material, that everything that God gives us, right? Wine could be abused for, the physical world can be abused and corrupt it. We could overdo wine, it could, right? There's disease, alcoholism, all these things, right? But wine can also be what we use to sanctify Shabbat, right? So it's all about balance ultimately, and not going too far one way or the other. Go ahead.
I have a comment, then
Yeah.
Justin's up there. I have a problem with the closeness and furthering
Distance, yeah.
distance, yeah, thank you. Because I'm thinking of childbirth, which of course I'm never gonna experience. But I'm thinking that if anything happens in this world that would bring you closer to God would be childbirth.
Mhm.
And yet there's 40-day waiting period for boys and 80 for girls.
Right, so this is a really interesting question. I was sort of waiting for it to come up and
You were
then,
waiting for it to come up?
yeah, and I can always rely on this. And then Nelson will get to you, but, again, if I'm
In
sort of,
40 days, you'll get to me.
in 40 days. Right.
And nights, don't forget the nights.
So if I'm trying to make the case that Judaism doesn't denigrate the physical and that there's a balance between the spiritual and the physical and elevating, then why does it seem like there is a sort of negative or judgment attached to whether you have a boy or a girl and how much time is the pursuant purification period, right? If you have a boy,
I was
it's-
actually forgetting about the 40 and 80, just you're impure, period, just because you gave birth.
right, okay. Well, again, I think that's why it comes back to how do you define impure? If you define it as, it sounds in English, as something that is bad or something that is dirty or gross, right, or whatever, then yes, it sounds like what, then the question emerges, what's bad about childbirth, which should bring you closer to God? It's this unbelievable spiritual experience, right? And physical experience. It's a toll on the body as we will never experience ourselves personally, but we know from indirect experience or stories,
Well,
right?
maybe you.
Yeah, that it is, right? But so why is that? Why would there be impurity associated with that at all? But again, it's not impurity in the sense of gross or bad. It's this,
But even if you call it distance.
yeah. So I would,
It's a problem
yeah,
for me, even
right,
if it's called
because it
distance.
actually is bringing closer. But I would say
I
that,
could
yeah,
say after the birth, you might have a distance because you're too busy with the baby,
yeah.
but not the birth itself.
Yeah, no, it absolutely, and I think of it as actually, the sermon I gave right after Noah's birth was about being in Kodeshing, the Holy of Holies, like stepping into the inner sanctum of the sanctuary on Yom Kippur, the high priest, right, the holiest of holiest experiences, and that the sort of leave that we got afterwards to just sit in that. And it's in the language in Torah is also sitting in that quote unquote impurity for a number of days, to me was the most sacred experience of ultimate closeness, both interpersonally with the family experience and then also between God, the divine, and humanity that it is. And that's not the only way to experience that kind of closeness to God, but certainly I would say that is one of the great examples. Nelson, and then if
Bill.
we do want to unpack the discrepancy between 40 and 80, I'm happy to do that as well. Nelson.
Two things. One, I thought that sex on Friday nights was the experience was as close as ever we're going to get to creation, what God went through, and that it brings us into that holy experience. It's not a distraction. It does bring us closer, allegedly.
Right,
Two,
and that, yeah, okay, wait, let me respond one at a time and then we'll get to two, sorry.
Okay.
But just for that one, so absolutely, and Kabbalistically, right, there is this erotic mapping that goes on where through the act of tikkun, of fixing what is broken in the world is actually, when we fix what's broken in the world down here, there are celestial implications, right, reverberations that actually reunite aspects of God that have been distanced, right? Talking about closeness and distance, and that is sort of Kabbalistically understood to be sexual in nature, that you are reuniting the sort of masculine and feminine in the traditional Kabbalistic language aspects of God to be reunited, which then leads to Shefa, this outpouring of divine energy that emanates to our world and feeds this is Lurianic Kabbalah, Zer Anpin, which is the baby of the Partsufim, the faces that are faced away from each other. Isaac Luria actually came from he lost his father at a young age. So the scholarship believes that he mapped his own sort of family experience onto his Kabbalistic
Interesting.
ideology, which is this broken family of faces facing away from each other, and through tikkun, sort of the mother and father face one another again and are able to sort of repair that sort of pipeline of divine energy that emanates to our world.
You had a number 2.
Number 2, Elsie, go ahead.
I'm always stuck at number 2. I went through the experience of childbirth education with my wife, my late wife, and one of the things that was emphasized was that most women in the pain of childbirth swear at their husbands and swear off having sex again, and sometimes maybe swear at God. And I'm wondering if this was also true several thousand years ago, and so that the rabbi's assumption or the Torah's assumption was that the woman had said and done things in the moment of the pain of childbirth that needed extra.
That's very funny. I don't know if that's literally true, but I like that I think that's very funny. And maybe you say things, and actually this is a perfect segue. So I will get other comments, but I do want to move on to what the focus of today is going to be. But that maybe the experience of childbirth is so painful and in some ways so traumatic physically that you say things come out of your mouth that you would regret having said or wish you didn't say, right? So, which is actually how the rabbis understand Mitzorah, which many of you have heard before, I'm sure, which is that Mitzorah is not a physical, this is something that my uncle reminded me of last night over Shabbos dinner. He loves giving great drashot. If anybody has the benefit of hearing his drashas, they're wonderful. But he was reminding us that the rabbis take this not as a physical leprosy, and that leprosy is actually sort of a mistranslation of what Mitzorah is, but as a spiritual affliction. And where do these, so this is sort of a troubling theology of reward and punishment, where God is literally giving people afflictions because of their behavior. If they sin, they get diseases. So that's something that we could unpack theologically. It's not what I personally believe. However, the rabbis believed that was going on, that this is not leprosy, it is an affliction caused by sin. So this is a spiritual affliction. And what is the sin of that Mitzorah is describing? Lashon hara. And the way they get that is midrashically with word play, because Mitzorah sounds an awful lot like it's a contraction of the words talking about pregnancy. It's a contraction of the words Motzi Shem Ra. Metzorah, Motzi Shem Ra. Motzi Shem Ra, it's not talking about Hamotzi, but it is talking about bringing forth, not bread from the earth, but bringing forth a bad name, which is what gossip is. You are giving someone a bad name. And so as a result, you get leprosy. And if you think about it, what happened when Miriam was saying bad things about Tzipporah, Moses' wife?
Yes.
Boom, leprosy. So that's sort of how the rabbis are getting not just the midrashic pun, but they're also sort of, they have proof texts.
It makes me think really that it's like hives.
Hives.
In other words, when you are nervous, done something, you don't want someone, you're trying to keep something.
Oh, interesting.
Break up.
Like something it's coming out physically, something that you're keeping it. That's interesting. Go ahead.
So I know that we're the spiritual mode, but I, as a physician, want to bring out 2 points. I think after childbirth, it's really not how the woman obviously has to heal. Like, I think it's appropriate that in that view, then the husband cannot approach her for 40 days because there's a healing process and there even can be infections that occur. But number 2, for the first time, it's occurred to me. So when you have a female child born, they've been exposed to the mother's estrogen levels, high estrogen levels, and many of them will have some vaginal bleeding after, about a week or 2 after. So it, for the first time, occurs to me that possibly the second 40 days is the mother observing what the child, in a sense, I don't know, like, that's an interesting
Early
thing, that they may
adoption.
have observed.
Yeah,
They may have observed that feature occurring to.
that's
infant
fascinating.
children.
That's fascinating. Just to give a little more on this in terms of how the rabbis thought of it, because I haven't heard that answer. I think that's really interesting. But even Ezra says that it has to do about how long it takes for the male and female organs to form in utero. So it's like
Yeah.
amazing that they wouldn't necessarily have known that with where their science was at the time, but that doesn't stop the rabbis from even being more ambitious without having the benefit of the technology we have now to know what they claim to know goes on. But they were saying that in utero that it takes 40 days for the male organ and 80.
It's really 10 to 12 weeks before it's fully formed.
10 to 12
weeks of
weeks.
gestation. Yeah,
Quick math, how far off
So-
was even Ezra?
so that's 70 days. He was off by 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay, not too bad. That say that's, they disagree and they say something else, which is, this is weird and I didn't quite have such a handle on it that I was gonna not bring it up unless pressed, so now I'll bring it up, but it was, they were saying that,
Are you being pressed?
yeah. They identified boys with warmth and heat and girls with moist and cold, and I'm not sure where they're getting that, but something about because girls are born and are moist and wet, boys are too, so I don't understand what
Yeah.
really, I don't have a full handle on this one, so, but that's the claim at least, so because of that, it takes longer, like when you're warm, it's sort of like, you don't need more of an incubation period, not to use more.
Oh, this is the way they're
Prenatal.
explaining the 40 days versus 80 days.
Yes, that
is
it's
what
sort of
you're
like
saying.
because girls are born moist and wet, that there's sort of a longer period of quote unquote warming up. But those are some of the rabbinic debate around it.
Yeah,
But the other thing is because of circumcision, right? Because of written law, because the calculus here is it's the 7 days and then 33 days of sitting of the blood of purification, right? But the 7 days is sort of the nidah for boys. For girls, it's 7 plus 7, everything is doubled, 7 plus 7, and then 33 plus,
33.
66.
is that right? So, yeah,
They're doing 80 days.
right. Please don't make me do math, I'm getting sweaty. I think it's yeah. Okay, so that's sort of but because of milah, because of the circumcision, the mother would need to be in a state of purity in order to attend the bris, basically. So that's sort of where the rabbis are saying it's shorter for boys so that the mother could be in a state of ritual purity for the circumcision. Sorry? Redeeming the firstborn.
Yeah, that's at the third.
Yeah.
Ah,
Need to be in a state, sure. Okay, so it's great. One thing I love about Torah Cafe is about going on all the unexpected pathways. But where I wanted to get back to, then Bill had his hand, so I do want to get to Bill, but Motzi Shamra, so if Shemini talks about not only animal purity and impurity, but what we consume, right? What goes through our lips, what goes in our mouths, then it's interesting that we start Tazria Mitzora with human purity and impurity and what goes out of our mouths, which is gossip and speech, and the power of speech to create. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. Vayomer, right? Yehior and Yehior. God spoke. You can create worlds into being, and then the power of speech to destroy. The rabbis say that gossip is akin to murder. Why? Because their public humiliation is to cause the face to go white, which happens, right? When you're so embarrassed, there's sort of this flushing of this. But the causing the face to go white is this idea of when blood drains from your face, it's like bloodshed, right? It's like a corpse, right? You have like killed somebody. If you bring forth a bad name, you've literally damaged or destroyed someone's reputation, which in some ways could be worse than death. If you saw the Crucible, not just the play, but the film with Daniel Day-Lewis, there's a classic scene where he is willing to physically be killed, but he just don't take my name, just give me my name, right? Just you cannot take my name, right? So in some ways, your name, your reputation is so much more important than your physical existence, some might argue, right? So that is all the more worse if you besmirch someone's reputation. Let's go, Bill
Your name
Bijan.
goes on.
Because your name can outlive you, right, your
Yes.
physical body.
So I love rabbinical interpretation of all this because it's, they're looking at it through their lens and their time as we do now. But I don't know, when I just look at the biblical discussions, it almost seems like there's this sense of ritual, because I think it's all ritual, whether you can go into the area or not, which doesn't apply anymore. And I think it's returning to some sort of normal human status. And it's deviations from normal human status, which seem to make you unable to serve. So it's not like we have to be heightened. It doesn't mean anything, that we don't have to be super people. We just have to be normal, average people to participate in the temple services, normal people do. And so discharges or any physical manifestation makes us different. Birthing, even though it's a pleasant thing, you have to wait to return. Why a boy versus a girl? Maybe there's hormonal reasons, I don't know. But there's some sense of just, you gotta be a normal, average physical person to participate. And all this, I think the source of these deviations are the spiritual side of things.
Yeah, so it's so interesting, and hi, Yingli, hi, welcome, Shabbat Shalom. I think that's a very interesting theory, and the one thing that I'll just add to it is Rabbi Artson, who's coming as our scholar in residence, Rabbi Brad Artson.
In June.
In June, we're very excited, but
I can't remember.
he talks about, because this whole thing, and we talked about it in a lunch and learn, about how the certain people who are barred from being priests, right, and serving in the tabernacle, in the sanctuary, if you have a mum, which is a sort of deformity or blemish, right? If you even so sort of what you're talking about what is quote unquote normal and what are quote unquote deviations from that norm. And so he wrestles with this, especially as somebody who has a son with special needs. And he says, what is this excluding people from the service of God? And the rabbis say that it's not, and this is the claim he makes off of that, right? Because the rabbis are saying what this is it's not about who is worthy or unworthy of performing, those rights with God. Thank you. Just dump it on my head. It's the rabbis use this analogy, which is that it's basically you would not use a broken hammer to hammer a nail, right? So the point is when you are, he actually uses that, that can seem insulting because it's like you're comparing anybody who's not quote unquote normal, whatever that means, to being a broken instrument. That's his point, is the instrument, not the broken, right? Everybody's broken, so we all have our own brokenness. But when you are serving in that function, you are purely an instrument of the enacting atonement for the people, or whatever it is that the certain rite is doing. And so you are purely serving as an instrument, and you would only use an instrument that is quote unquote, a certain way, right? Yeah, perfect, whatever that means, right? But that it purely is about serving in a moment as an instrument. And it has nothing to do with commenting on humanity, in which we all have our own brokenness, and there is no, what is normal and what is, so he says it much more articulately, but I just wanted to bring that into this because of what does it mean to be normal? And certainly I don't think our Torah is setting up a sort of Aryan notion, right? That would be antithetical to Judaism, this idea that there is a perfect or there is a normal.
What is
Good. What is gossip? I wanted to ask you why gossip feels so good. Why is it so tempting? Gossip is obviously something that that was ultimately what I was gonna say. I think there are a lot of reasons we could give for why gossip feels good. You're on the inside, right? It's sort of, there's something, also, I think there's something weirdly human about it. If you read Noah Yuval Harari's Sapiens, he talks about gossip was actually one of the things that allowed Homo sapiens to stand out and survive against all the other groups of proto, other Homo groups, right? That because we could tell stories and we could coalesce around those stories and we could sort of put down other groups and elevate our groups, it was cohesive. Gossip is bonding
Is that why
at the expense of, but it's a powerful tool, and he argues
Is
actually
that why the Jews survived?
gossip, because we're such good gossipers. Well, so that is, I want us to be realistic about what we're up against, right? It's one thing to rail against the evils of gossip, but we have to be honest about what is the power of gossip? What function does it serve in society, and maybe historically, what have been its benefits? Why does it just feel good? Why is it so tempting? But then ultimately, once we're honest about that, I think we could actually try to resolve ourselves to avoiding it.
If you talk
ahead.
negatively, I'm sorry.
Let's go, new voices, and then I'll get back to Ryan.
Oh, just that I think when you gossip, you're in need, you're suffering somehow, and you're looking for some outlet and somebody to receive that, so.
Mm.
Serves a point, but it's not the most productive path to that.
Right, can you say more about that? Like, so why are you in need? What do
Yeah,
you-
I mean, I'm thinking a lot about it in my work context right now, where there's a lot of low morale and a lot of leadership making decisions that are troubling, and a lot of people are talking, right? And now my face is turning red.
You just killed yourself.
But just that it's a need that people want reassurance that they're safe, that their families will be safe, that their futures will be safe. I think gossip in like a social context is, will people like me? Will I have friends? Will I be safe? And so I think if you can hear people from that lens, you know, it might start despairing someone else. But what is it? It's a mirror, right? It's a mirror for something that you need. And maybe if the listener can somehow redirect that to a more compassionate place, you can from that path.
Interesting.
Right, so there is the idea that it is for security, whether it's social I don't mean social security. But that's another thing, but your standing in society, sort of needing to know where but also it's a way of dispersing information, disseminating information, right? You need to be in the know, right? Knowledge is power, so there's that element, go ahead.
I'm gonna say, like, I feel like to some degree, I feel like can gossip somewhat be like a good thing? Cause I know to some degree, it's not similar things are also happening at my work where I'm like, I end up hearing a lot of things. And I'm just like, I know for me, it's just like, okay, this doesn't sound, what I'm hearing doesn't sound good. So usually what I end up doing is going upwards and being like, hey, this is what I'm hearing. What is going on that can help make potentially ease and like not knowing what upper management is like really talking about in the back end but what's actually realistically happening on the like floor. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It's not, so thank you that's a good balance, right? It's not just about disseminating accurate information, right? Like in a game of telephone, gossip often is spreading falsehood and
Right.
lies, right? So that's also the danger of gossip, is that it's not necessarily truth. And that's also sort of the connection between death, right? That's the whole emet versus met thing, the Dybbuk story of, right? The difference between truth and death is just one letter, the letter aleph, right? Emet, emet. Nelson, and then I do want to introduce some text.
Why not? Basically, I think gossip is false. So it's not information at all. All you're learning is what's being talked about, not what's true.
It could be true or false.
The real issue is that a real moral scheme has to have a theory of advice giving. And that's a lot of what goes on in the Torah. It's advice giving and how to give advice. And I connect it in my own mind with the French Jewish philosopher Levinas, who says that basically human beings are moral, that is judgmental, rather than factual, that is observational. And it lends itself to a different kind of, the problem of gossip is that it's simply not any kind of an observation, it's false. So it's always harmful in that sense.
Well, the rabbis would agree that gossip is always harmful, but they would say even if it's true, right? Even just talking about somebody behind their back, even if it's true, the rabbis still say is prohibited. You really shouldn't be talking about others with them not present. Again, it's a sort of deleting or erasing of their role. Go ahead, and then I do want to jump in.
True, what gossip does is you're simply telling someone some fact.
Mhm.
The person isn't around, because the person may be dead, for one thing, but it helps the second person understand the first person, when you're talking about. And it may clarify something
Mhm.
to show that, yeah, he did such and such thing and it was bad, but you know,
Hmm.
he did it for this reason, and then it's therefore not that bad. He had a reason for doing it that way.
Right, there's a compassionate and sort of the be my ears, right? Like there's a way in which some people, you're actually doing somebody a service by speaking them up to someone or giving people the context they need to go into a situation, right? When I was new to B'nai Yeshurun, I don't want to now out people for having engaged in gossip with me, but when I was new to B'nai Yeshurun, I was going to be serving as a rabbi, right? The assistant rabbi here. It's very easy for me to insult somebody, right? If I don't know certain things about them, or if I don't like, oh, hi, what's your name? You don't know who I am? My name is on the building. I am Mr. B'nai Yeshurun. I am Mrs. B'nai Yeshurun. I am Mrs. Yeshurun, right? So it's helpful for somebody to just whisper in your ear, just so you know, you're about, but again, what's then the implication there is that are there some people who warrant that kind of preface and others who don't? So again, you can see how even when it is beneficial, there is still what's left out or what are the negative impacts of, right? You shouldn't have to be Mrs. Yeshurun to have the same level of. Yeah.
Inkling, because I will say something, oh, are you going on vacation next week? That must be fun. You probably go to the mountains again. And the person in the middle of a bitter divorce, and I feel like they look at me like I'm an idiot.
Right, so thank you. This is a perfect segue, and I'm gonna transition now to some text, but that's exactly it, because people need to feel seen, and they deserve that, right? They deserve to feel seen, especially in a place that we want to feel like home, like a sanctuary, right? So if they feel they're not seen, if you say something that clearly means you didn't realize that they have been divorced for X, or you.
Here's the thing, you know.
Yeah, there's also an unfair expectation. Yes, it's true. But it comes from a place of wanting to be seen and known in a place that's about community and relationship. Bijan, and then I'm gonna jump in.
Before I forget,
Yes.
I would like to recommend to everybody, not that, everybody that has a young person in his family that in the future will be married, to ask an Orthodox rabbi, or at least at the minimum, a conservative rabbi, what is the true meaning of second verse on the top of page 650. I'm not going to say anything more.
You want me to step it out because
What page is
What
it?
page?
650.
What page?
650.
Bijan, is it okay? I don't want, okay. So Bijan is saying, and this is the adult sort of R-rated version of
PG rate.
Okay, so there, let me.
That two on the very top of page 650.
Okay, Daber al b'nei Yisrael le'emor isha ki tazria ve'yalda zachar, right? So that the rabbis read this as, what is tazria ve'yalda? What's coming? Isha ki tazria ve'yalda zachar. It's saying that this unlocks, and this is a very traditional, so I apologize in advance for those who would understandably take offense that it's putting more value on a male child. Traditionally, there is this sort of, oh, well, you want a boy, right? So the rabbis read into this line
What
saying,
line that is?
we're
Chapter
talking about
verse?
verse 2, chapter 12, verse 2 of Tazria. Oh, of Levitic, sorry, yes, we're in Tazria, it's chapter 12, verse 2. That because of the way that the rabbis read into this, some rabbis read into this, that Tazria ve'alda, that it's Ishaki, that when in sexual intercourse, when the woman is experiencing pleasure first, then Zachar, ve'alda Zachar, then she will give birth to a boy. So if you're looking for a secret, and I'm sure that science, Terry, you'll tell me that the science absolutely here's this. But anyway, so this is
To the
ancient
kids.
rabbinic traditional insights as to the recipe for having a boy. Right?
Yeah, but also that they talk about that they differentiate between a vaginal birth and a cesarean. That is sexist too. I don't know, sexist, that's not nice.
Got it,
You
yes,
still are bleeding.
right. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, but I do, for the sake of time, I really do want to dive into some text here. So, but thank you, everybody. This has been fascinating. I hope you're finding it
Is there
interesting.
anything talking about the breastplate
Let them go, let them go.
or gems?
Oh, yeah, no, it's just Shem's a Torah, right? That's fine. It's all about the breastplate. It's all about the breastplate.
Say something to.
Mark,
Oh, I did, but then you've been trying to get onto the text for the last 10 minutes.
but yeah, please. New voice is always good.
Because we spent so much time talking about Lashon Hara and, from a perspective and halachic and a rabbinical perspective, where it's mainly negative or almost exclusively negative. But we just kind of remind the other perspective of what Oscar Wilde said, and he said, the only thing worth being talked about is not being talked about.
Right. There is a certain flattery in being a person of note, a person who is the subject of people's conversation, right? But all press is good press, right? Is that, as long as the name is getting out there? Okay, all right, we're gonna jump in. So this is a collection called Iturei Torah. It's mostly Hasidic commentary, though there's a lot of Musar in here as well. And I'm gonna get to some Musar, which is character building, Jewish insights into cultivating your character. But so it explores sort of slander, gossip as pertains to Tazria Mitzvah. So I'm gonna bring a few that we can talk about, both the way we talk about others and the way we talk about ourselves. Okay, so this is, if you want to follow along, chapter 13, verse 3, Leviticus, chapter 13, verse 3. And the priest will look on the nega, that's a plague, in the skin of the flesh. And if the hair in the nega has turned white and the sight of the nega is deeper than the skin on his flesh, it is a nega of tzara'at, right? That means it is this leprosy, even though leprosy isn't a great translation. And the priest will look on him and pronounce him unclean. So here's where the commentary kicks in. It notes, and the priest will look on the nega, right, the plague, and the priest will look on him. The question is, those of us who are used to the midrash, and what are the commentary going to be? Sorry?
On him.
Oh, interesting. On him, it's just because it's referring to a specific person that the priest is looking at. Okay, that's an interesting way to go with it. Actually, that is sort of where it's going, but through a different route. What the commentary here is picking up on, this is from Meshach Chochmah, is the name of the commentator, is that there's a redundancy, which is look. The priest will look, right? And then later in the verses, and the priest will look. Why twice, right? The Torah, very economical with language. Why say look twice? And the commentator says, why the redundancy? One can say that the verse refers to two different aspects. In the first, the priest will look on the nega, on the plague. This involves the physical act of looking, where the priest checks to see if there are signs of tzara'at, of this leprosy. The second aspect, though, refers to another type of looking. Thus, we are told, for example, that if the person is a bridegroom in the first 7 days of his marriage, or if a person comes to the priest in the middle of a festival, the priest does not judge the person to have tzara'at until that week or the festival has ended, so as not to disturb his joy. That might be dangerous in terms of contagions. But basically saying, if you notice the signs of tzara'at, there's two kinds of looking. One is the looking, but the other is look at the external, right? Look at the circumstances.
History.
Look at the history maybe, but don't just look at the patient as a as a body to poke and prod, but get to know the life of the person, or maybe where this person is in their life, and that needs to be a factor too. There's two kinds of looking. Thus, the priest must look at various external factors as well, for the ways of the Torah are the ways of pleasantness, right? Darchei Noam, right? That it's not just it's not just about being quote unquote right, but it's about being kind. It's about being compassionate. That there are two kinds. You can't just point to it, okay, Sarat, and now we're gonna isolate you for 7 days, even though it's your wedding today, right? Even though you're
I just
married.
want to throw something out here that's from a totally different area.
Yeah.
Tzedek, tirdof. That's why tzedek is in there twice.
Right, it's how you do justice. Right, it's not just that you do justice, it's how you do justice too, right?
So this is saying the same thing.
Yeah. And here's another one. Same idea. This is from Rav Y. Trunk of Kutno. And the priest will look on the nega, and the priest will look on him, again, looking at the two looks. It would appear that we have a hint here that when one looks at a person, one should not only see his or their bad points where they have been afflicted, but should look at them as a whole, including their good points. Thus, although the priest must look on the nega, afterwards, he must look on him as a whole person, right? So one of the problems with gossip too is that it distills somebody to the characterization you're painting or to specific action, they did this, as opposed to seeing the person and their totality. And in that way, it's a sort of
That's the epitome of pornography.
the epitome of pornography, right? Objectification. Objectifying a person and depriving them of their humanity. Okay, I want to bring a few more here. Okay, now here's an interesting contrast. So it says, if you go to chapter 13, verse 9, it says, when a nega of tzara'at is in a person, then they will be brought to the priest, right?
That's gossip itself.
I'll bring it to the priest.
Yeah.
Well, hold on, let's see, that's not where they're going here. Rabbi Asher of Stolin would complain about those Hasidim who, when they came to their Rebbe, right, they obviously want to impress their Rebbe. When they came to the Rebbe, would only emphasize the good in themselves while hiding the bad. Makes sense, right? You're pumping yourself up to the person, your
selling
role
yourself.
model, your hero, your leader. You're selling yourself. When I, he said, would come to my father and teacher, to my Rebbe, I would hide the good, because it was not he who decided whether one is rewarded or punished. Basically, the Rebbe is not God, right? I don't need to try to pump I don't need to give my good. I would show them the bad in me, because one must show the priest the negaim. So referring here to the priest in this commentary is the Rebbe, and it says that you bring you show the plague to the priest. So he's saying, I wouldn't talk about my good traits. I would be honest I would be forthcoming about my shortcomings. And while it doesn't record the Rebbe's reaction to the Chassid's approach here, I think that there's something true to this. There's a story about job interview. Somebody's interviewing somebody for a job, and says, they have the whole interview, whatever. But then at the end says, it's a little bit musty in here. Can you? It's warm. Can you open up the window? And the first applicant goes, and it won't budge, and starts putting their whole body into it, and just won't just gives it all until the interviewer says, thanks, don't even worry about it, all good, thank you, and thank you for your time, right? Second applicant, whole interview, it's a great interview, and then says, so the warm in here, would you open up the window? Same kind of thing happens, kind of open it, can't budge, does everything they can, takes some tools, whatever it is, tries to get it over, can't do it. Thank you very much for your time. Third applicant does the whole whatever, they interview, and then it's a little warm, goes to the window, can't open it, and turns to the interviewer and says it won't open. And the interviewer hires them, because if I have a problem, I want to know that you won't, try to tackle it without asking for help, right? I want to encourage you to be forthcoming with your flaws instead of trying to compensate for them and actually, break something, right? So anyway, I see in that this sort of idea of instead of pumping yourself up so much, to actually be forthcoming about the ways in which you struggle, and that being more appealing to a Rebbe or to a boss, to say, okay, we can work with this. You'll be honest with me.
Your first going back on paragraph, what you said. When he goes to the Rebbe and doesn't tell the good, then he is telling again, he's bringing
Himself.
he's bringing the disease, but not talking about the history of the disease.
Okay,
Why
sure,
he why he might have the disease, which is, today we know is very important. And even with gossip,
Yeah,
sometimes you're telling the second person something, and yeah, it's gossip. But might help that person.
right.
That person has seeing, but he won't let you know.
Right.
So just make sure that you bring him big print. That's gossip.
But it's hardly evil, right? Yeah, exactly, and can be helpful. Good, so I wanna explore the other aspects of it, right? So what you present, whether you're looking for the bad, looking for the good, hiding the bad. There's another commentary here from the commentator Y. Yefet. Okay, he says, he will dwell alone outside the camp will be his habitation. So this is chapter 13, verse 46, talking about the sort of isolation that happens. You isolate them outside the camp. And he writes, in 1848, there was a cholera epidemic in Vilna. As usual, in times of calamity, the Jews began to examine what sins of theirs might have brought this about, right? What did we do to cause this? It's again, that sort of dangerous reward punishment theology. One man came to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He is sort of the father of Musar, of this cultivating your Jewish character, inward traits. So one man came to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and told him that a certain person was violating the Torah law. So maybe this is the reason for the cholera outbreak, right? Rabbi Yisrael said to him, a person with tzara'at was sent outside all three camps in the desert because, as our sages tell us, tzara'at comes from slandering others. The sin of slander does not consist of spreading lies about others, but seeking faults in others rather than in oneself. Thus, the one who slanders is told, if you are so good at finding fault, go out of the camp, remain isolated by yourself, and search for your own faults and sins. So this is take a good look in the mirror, right? So this person thinks that they're serving the community by outing the transgressor, who is certainly the cause of the cholera outbreak. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, before being so quick to indict others, why don't you isolate yourself, go outside of the camp, right? Seclude yourself from society, of which you're so good at gossiping about, and take a good look at yourself. Start there. What are your own faults? And that's what Musar is all about, right? How do we improve ourselves from within, from the inside out? But there is a danger here, right? The danger here is that, okay, so we have one rabbi who doesn't tell the Rebbe any of the good qualities and only the bad, because I'm saying I'm self-aware. I know where I need to grow, and that's a good quality. There's this Rabbi Yisrael Salanter story of somebody who is pretty oblivious to their own faults and only very quick to see the faults in others. But then we have another extreme, right? Terry, you said it was all about balance. So this is all about, where do we find ourselves on the spectrum of criticism? We're criticizing others, criticizing ourselves. Where is it good? Where is it productive to be striving for self-betterment? And where does it go too far, so it's self-flagellation? Where are we putting ourselves down? And that in itself is a form of gossip, of mitzora. And that's embodied in this story by the famous commentator, the Chafetz Chaim. This is the law of the mitzora. Okay, so this is chapter 14, verse 2. It starts by Moshe Lemor Zot Tihiyeh Torah HaMetzorah. This is the Torah, or the law, or the ritual for a leper, the one afflicted with tzara'at. This is the story. This is the law of the Motzi Shem Ra, right? The one who brings forth a bad name, the gossiper. I'm gonna skip this and go straight to the story. It is told that the Chafetz Chaim was once walking in his town of Regin on a very cold night. The street was empty. As he walked, a man from another town stopped him and asked, do you know where your rabbi, the righteous Chafetz Chaim, lives? Okay, it's a dark and rainy night. A guy asks the actual Chafetz Chaim, who he doesn't recognize to be the Chafetz Chaim, where is your righteous, amazing rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim? I'm looking for him. The Chafetz Chaim answered him, first, he isn't a rabbi, and second, he isn't righteous. The man asked, what are you talking about? Everyone considers him to be the one who fears God and a saintly man. The Chofetz Chaim tells him, whatever everybody says means nothing. The world doesn't know him. I know him. I know him well. And I promise that whatever people say is greatly exaggerated. The man became very angry. He's insulting this great sage, the Chofetz Chaim. And eventually he struck him, right? He was, right, how dare you? He's defending his great rabbi. How dare you to be? The Chofetz Chaim was greatly distressed at the fact that he had caused another Jew to sin.
Oh.
A little later, he returned to his home and found the man waiting for him in tears. He had found out that he had hit none other than the Chofetz Chaim himself. The Chofetz Chaim calmed him down and said, no harm was done. You did nothing wrong. I deserve to be hit because one is not only forbidden to speak Lashon Hara about others, but about oneself as well. So this is where the spectrum, we know Moses is the great, humble, like our most modest, and that's lifted up as an example of what a dugma that we should all follow. But there is a dark side of excessive humility, which is self-flagellation, which is speaking gossip about yourself, right? Gossip isn't just a prohibition against bringing others down because it's like killing somebody else. It's also it's also a form of self-mutilation, of killing yourself, right? We might think and we're being forthcoming about our flaws, right? I'm hiding the good, I'm elevating the bad because that's how I grow, or I'm being humble or whatever. But there's also false modesty. There's not knowing your worth. There's not pumping yourself up. And that's what Musar, ultimately, what Judaism is all about is, remember we talked about elevate, not denigrating the physical, the gashmiut, our bodies, our physical selves, but it's all about finding the kedusha, the holiness, the sanctity, and elevating that. So when we are too hard on ourselves, we're actually committing a form of chilul Hashem. We're desecrating God because we're created in the image of God, right? When we insult someone else, that's the story of the ugly man. This is another story of, do you know about the ugly man? There's a rabbi is walking along, and he's a great rabbi coming to this small village, and so a villager from the town goes out to greet him and says, Rabbi, but this villager is exceedingly ugly. In parentheticals in the narrative, exceedingly ugly man. And he says, Rabbi, it's such a great rabbi. We're so excited to welcome you to our vision. And the rabbi says something, I don't want to misquote, something.
It's about the creator.
Well, that's how he said. So he says, is everyone in your village as ugly as you? I think it's like, is everyone in your village as ugly as you? And hello, Shabbat Shalom. So the villager responds, I don't know. Why don't you ask the artist who made me? Right? Why don't you ask the artisan who crafted the vessel? Right? And immediately the rabbi supplicates himself and he says, I was wrong. I never should have said that to you. Please forgive me. But the villager is not so quick to forgive him. He follows him all the way to the village and everyone prays, oh, it's this great rabbi. Welcome to our village. Oh my, we're so honored to have you and host you. Please. And the villager says, oh, why are you so excited about this? He is not, he's not who you think he is. He's not such a righteous man. And the villagers say, how could you say this about such a great rabbi? And they say what he said, and they say, please, you have to make it right. We don't want this rabbi. The rabbi is begging for forgiveness, and ultimately the villager is persuaded. He says, as long as you don't do this to anybody else, right? As long as you're not calling, you learn from this experience and you're not calling anyone else ugly like you did to me, then I forgive you. And the rabbi learns from this. He says, from this experience, I learned finally what it means in the Talmud when it says that we should be a reed and not a rod. Actually, sorry, that was advice my dad gave me. Which I'll explain. What we learn in the Talmud, that the reed is what merited to be the instrument to write Torah. The reed is the instrument that was merited to write Torah because it is flexible, it blows in the wind, as opposed to a rod, which is unforgiving, right? So he was so grateful that this villager forgave him, that he was ultimately flexible, that he bent with the wind and that's why the Torah is written with a flexible instrument, which is also interesting in terms of how we understand Torah, whether it's a very rigid set of laws or whether there is indeed flexibility and room for interpretation. But what I love about the story is it asks who really is the ugly man in the story, right? Is tzara'at a physical affliction or is it a spiritual one, right? who was spiritually afflicted in this story. It's the one who could speak ill about his fellow. But then also it's about that, you know, how Torah is written with the reed. My dad, when dropping me off for college, said, "Be a reed, not a rod." So I want to try to bring it all together as we conclude here, which is that gossip, we talked about some of its benefits. We also obviously talked about its destructive capacity and its evil. Not just directed towards others, but also directed towards ourselves, that don't harp on the superficial, the physical, but go deeper as we seek to elevate ourselves and others and recognize that we're all created in Tselem Elohim and God's image, and that to besmirch anyone else created or ourselves created in the divine image is to do no less than to denigrate God. Whereas Judaism is all about elevating and bringing out the godliness in ourselves and others. So Shabbat Shalom.
Can you say the blessing for studying Torah? Say the ending blessing.
Yeah, you want to end with the blessing for studying Torah?
Yes, can you just read it? I don't know. by heart.
Absolutely. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.